have long said the only time you ever really hear anyone talk about Palworld is when some game journal is looking to publish some negative story about Nintendo. Whether it's about the lawsuit or the Pokemon IP or how they handle these kinds of plagiarism cases. Uh, the Palworld thing is just an excuse for clickbait from gaming journalists and YouTubers. It is absolutely, I think, the biggest example of how everyone will bend over backwards to defend a company that's clearly in the wrong just because they want to spite Nintendo. Like Pocket Pair is losing this lawsuit. There is no recovery from this. They're never going to have another success story after this. There will be no uh, actually, Power World in and of itself was not successful, but that's another story entirely. You know, there's so much to unpack with this situation. But the big thing for me is just how non-Pokemon fans have tried to make this out to be some big like Pokemon killer thing. When that isn't going to happen, that is never going to happen. It would take over a decade to like build up an audience, to have the kind of brand to create the kind of brand synergy that Pokemon enjoys with the video games, the trading card game, and the anime. And Power World just isn't going to do it. That game didn't even last like a couple of months. It was kind of shocking to me. When during the Pokemon Day presentation of 2024, just how little like anybody was talking about Power World. And that is kind of the Power World community in general, is just this sheer obsession with the Pokemon brand IP, with Nintendo, with Game Freak and what they're doing, and there is no real momentum around their brand. And you'll see this happen, over and over again. Like they'll prop up anything to be anti-Pokemon, whether it's Dragon Quest or Shin Megami Tensei or like Atlas games in general, right? I've seen like all sorts of things be propped up against the Pokemon brand just to downplay the Pokemon brand, right? Again, nobody who tried saying that Yokai Watch was a Pokemon killer actually went out and bought Yokai Watch. This is very important when talking about this because like competition is not going to kill Pokemon. Okay, it's just not going to happen. This idea that Power World was some major threat to the company is laughably stupid, and it does need to be acknowledged going forward just how out of touch with reality the Power World audience actually is. And I find it very interesting, going into the Switch 2 season, just what Pocket Pair has been doing, like the kind of interviews they've been given and the kind of statements they've made. Because the last I've heard from them, right, they were giving an interview and they were just like, yeah, we're gonna put Power World on Nintendo Switch 2 if it's beefy enough. So like the idea was that like, ooh, if Nintendo hardware is powerful enough, we'll put Power World on it. Let's forget for a moment that like Power World could easily run on a Switch 1, but like Power World is Pocket Pair. They're releasing statements saying that they're going to release Power World on a Switch 2. And like, if that was actually going to happen, wouldn't they be like working with Nintendo? Wouldn't they have gotten like dev kits? Wouldn't they like be working to make that happen? They wouldn't like be making these like, stupid statements like, "Ooh, we'll support it if the hardware is good enough." It's like it's clearly meant to be inflammatory. Like it's meant to be the kind of thing that game journals report on and share to the masses. This is their brand of publicity. This is the only reason they're relevant, is that they constantly release statements like antagonizing Nintendo and the Pokemon Company. This is all they've ever done. It doesn't make them cool or badass. Like we're seeing something now with Genki, actually, the accessory manufacturer that was behind like the early Switch 2 weeks. Like Nintendo is filing a lawsuit against them too, and they're pulling the same similar stunt. Like, oh, we're just a small company. like it's kind of interesting how these companies are like weaponizing the online Nintendo hate to try and get their names out there and to try to get people to pay attention to them, to care about their like knockoff products, right? Like it's becoming kind of a trend, and I think if this continues, like more and more people are going to start seeing through it. Like the pocket pair situation, I think, is going to be really similar to like the Last of Us situation, like 10 years ago, right? Because this is kind of a similar thing, isn't it? Where, like, everyone comes out, like, declares The Last of Us to be the greatest thing in gaming, the greatest thing ever, the best game ever made. And, like, over a period of time, its reputation erodes, I should say. It erodes away because of the poorly received sequels, all of the other PlayStation IPs that copied its formula, and like people simply playing the game and realizing that it didn't live up to the expectations set by it. Like The Last of Us had a really good reputation to start with, but because of like the incompetency of Naughty Dog and Neil Druckmann, like their brand has just withered away to nothing. Like Pocket Pair is in a very similar situation where people thought that this would be like something to rally behind to destroy Nintendo. And what ends up happening instead is that like this company is absolutely taking an L in court. I think recently like a couple of YouTubers have released statements saying that like things aren't going well for Nintendo in that front. Don't believe it. You can look at Palworld's numbers. You can look at like how the merch isn't moving. You can look at how like animated products are in standstill. Like you can see like the public like kind of turn against them a little bit. Like the writing is on the wall for Palworld, and honestly has been since they showed off that initial trailer in 2021. Right, this is a game that simply shouldn't have been allowed to exist. Like this is a game featuring characters that the company does not own, and they have been exploiting the reputation of that brand to promote their own products. That is something that really needs to be acknowledged. Like at the very least, that Power World is a knockoff brand. It is a copycat product that doesn't deserve any respect or any attention at all. And yet, a lot of people are desperate to try and like make out Power World to be some like innovative success story. Don't believe it. Don't buy into it. It's not true. It is impossible. Power World is only relevant because of just how much contempt and hatred the gaming community has for Nintendo and the Pokemon Company.